Got any questions?
So, we need to have the double knot fine tuned so that it's a small value, and the D term small, but yet more than the double knot term, so that we get a small enough value.
Yeah.
So, like you said, if we have a large number of vacuum, then there might be some in which this is possible.
That's it. Yeah.
So does it mean that increasing the number of cycles?
Yeah. So certainly, if you have more 3 cycles, right, then there are more possibilities.
So basically, when you talk about increasing the number of vacuum, you mean possibilities of fluxes and cycles.
Yeah, and different Calabi-Yau's. All of those are also different vacuum of the string theory, right? So different Calabi-Yau, different fluxes, right? Different amount of fluxes through different cycles and so on.
So, okay, fine. So if we have those many possibilities and it turns out like there is one that gives our cosmic constant, what happens to the others? Like, are there multiverses or?
Yeah, I mean, so that's one possibility, that those others are perfectly good false vacuum of string theory, just like ours will be, right? And I mean, then the question will be whether they are realized somewhere, right? And this multiverse is a theory where it says that it can be realized somewhere if there is a very, a large positive cosmological constant vacuum, right, which is inflating very rapidly. Then that will make transitions into these different vacua, right? And so it could happen that the large positive cosmological constant vacuum inflates rapidly, and then these different parts of it makes phase transition into smaller positive cosmological constant vacua or even negative cosmological constant vacua, and those are populated. Right, so that's the notion of multiverse. But right now we are just focusing on classifying the possible vacua, right? Whether they're actually realized or not, we don't know right now. Yes.
So recently you added the anti-D3 brains and that broke the SUSY.
Yes.
So when was SUSY restored?
SUSY was restored before we added the anti-D3 brain, because the problem was that the D rho phi or D rho W, before we added the non-perturbative correction, was just minus del rho k times W, right? Because the del rho W term was 0. And so as long as W is non-zero, SUSY is broken, because d rho W has to be 0 for unbroken SUSY. Okay. But once we added the superpotential, okay, then there is an additional term which is del rho W times k. Just del rho W. Okay. And then we said that we will determine rho by solving this equation. Solving this and setting this equal to 0, right? So at that stage, SUSY got restored, right? Because all the other d alpha W's are 0 anyway. Right? That's how we have determined the corresponding model, right? And now we are seeing the rho will also be determined by solving this. And that restores SUSY. Is this okay? Yes.
This KKLT construction was like introducing a, considering a non-perturbative effect due to this.
Yes, that's right.
D3 activity.
Yeah.
Are there any other possibilities? Like,
well, depending on the situation, you can think of many different possibilities, right? I think this was the one which the found was the simplest, at a single term. But then there are other possibilities where you add multiple non-perturbative terms of this kind, right, with different coefficients, different exponents, and so on. The point is that you need to get something that depends on rho. Right? The W, if you want to restore SUSY, you need to add something to W which depends on rho. Right? And on general grounds, you can show that the perturbative corrections are not allowed. Okay, because if there are perturbative corrections, that will basically destroy the shift symmetry of the imaginary real part of rho. Okay. But non-perturbative corrections are allowed, and then what they show is that under certain circumstances, there are specific effects which generate rho-dependent corrections. And that's what they use to solve this. Okay, but certainly in more complicated situation, you can get more complicated dependence on rho.
For uplifting, so only anti-D3 combination is, this is only procedure, or there are other?
Well, that is the standard procedure that KKLT use. You can try to think of others, right? Which break, the point is you have to do something which presumably breaks supersymmetry, because one can show on general grounds that you cannot have supersymmetric vacua which has positive cosmological constant. Right? So whatever you do has to break supersymmetry if you want to get to positive cosmological constant. Right? Anti-D3 was the simplest possibility, but you can try to think of others. Right? The way you can modify the theory to refute it. But you always have to worry about whether that solution is stable, right, or nearly stable, because typically if you add something it will immediately annihilate, right. For example, if you just add a D3 bar, okay, it preserves all charge and everything else, right, but that will immediately annihilate, okay, because there is a tachyon sitting on the D3 bar system. So you have to make sure that whatever you do is sufficiently stable. Any other questions? Yes.
So this, when you're adding these anti-D3 waves, they will battery act generally in the
Yeah.
geometry, and then the calculations might change.
Yeah, calculations might change. So people have studied back reaction in various forms, right? That's where all this controversy comes in. Right? This Bena et al. Has been arguing that the back reaction destroys it, right? But recently there was a paper by Bolchinski and his group which claim that the back reactions are okay, right? There is some effect, but it's not significant enough to destroy the stability altogether. So certainly you have to take into account back reaction and make sure that the back reactions don't destroy the construction. Okay, so today we will be studying the stability. Okay, in fact we will, I think today and tomorrow we will do some general analysis of the stability of the vacuum, okay, in the context of a general quantum field theory, and then next week we will come back to KKLT, okay, applying it in that context. So stability of false vacuum. So let me begin by some general discussion. Okay, and we start with particle in a potential. Okay, we will make things a bit simpler. One-dimensional particle in a potential. And let's suppose that a potential has a structure like this. Okay, multiple minimum, two minimum, one below the other. And you know that classically we can keep a particle here and it will remain there forever. But quantum mechanically you know that if we leave a particle here, okay, its wave function slowly leaks out to this side, and if you wait for sufficiently long time, then you will find that it has gone, the wave function has gone into a state where most of the support is around this. Okay, and we interpret this by saying that there is a tunneling probability for the particle to go from here to here. Okay. One way to think of this tunneling is, in fact that's the way, that's what is provided by the WKV approximation, that the particle somehow tunnels through this barrier, okay, appears here. There is a finite probability for the particle to appear on this side, okay, by tunneling through the barrier, okay. And after that it can evolve classically. Okay. So it doesn't really matter how far this thing is, okay, it can be very far. Okay, that doesn't affect the tunneling probability too much. What matters for the tunneling probability is this point. Because WKB, we will write down the expression, the WKB expression later, because that WKB gives the suppression factor, but that's only dependent on this part. Now suppose that you replace a particle by a quantum field. Consider a scalar field here. and with the same kind of potential. Okay, except that now this V will be interpreted as V of phi. Okay, potential as a function of phi with double minimum. So again we know that classically we can keep the field here, okay, or we can keep the field here. So let me give this some name. Let's call this A. Let's call this B. So classical vacuum one is phi equal to A, the other one is phi equal to B. But you know that, so what I mean by classical vacuum, okay, that this is our starting point, phi equal to A is a classical vacuum, and then we will expand the fields in power series, expand the potential in a power series expansion of the fields, and use perturbation theory to quantize it, okay, which you can do either around this point or around this point, okay, because all the terms, so the quadratic term will for example determine the mass of the phi field, okay, which will be positive mass square because the second derivative is positive around both, and higher order terms will give interaction. Right? So as far as the perturbation theory is concerned, you can do perfectly good perturbation theory either by working around this or by working around this. Okay. But you know that this vacuum, okay, should not really be there. Okay. This should be what we call the false vacuum, because there should be a transition probability that takes you from this vacuum to this vacuum. Okay, that is, we cannot, in this vacuum we cannot survive forever. Okay, somehow this is the more stable one and you should land up there. Okay, so this we call the false vacuum. This is the true vacuum. But we also know intuitively that it shouldn't be possible, okay, the tunneling probability that phi everywhere, okay, so this is phi of x we are talking about, right, phi of x and phi of b. So this is for all x and this is also for all x. Okay, phi is x independent, so translation invariant vacuum. So now we know from intuition that you cannot just go from this configuration to this configuration, okay, at one step with a finite barrier. Okay, why not? Because what you have to do, if you want to change all of this to this, then at every point in x, right, you have to find a tunneling path that takes you from A to B. So there will be finite energy density that will be caused. Okay, this integral that you have to evaluate, the WKB separation factor, has to be integrated over the whole space, okay, and that will give you infinite result, right, because you are doing this for every space point, right, you integrate this over the whole space, that gives an infinite result. Okay. So you cannot just go from phi x equal to A to phi x equal to B. So the way this transition takes place is what is called the bubble nucleation. Okay, so I will describe now physically what it means. So let's suppose that you are in the false vacuum. Okay, phi x equal to A everywhere. Now what could happen? Phi x equal to A. Now quantum fluctuations could create a state where phi x is still A almost everywhere, except that in a small region phi x may be B. This we intuitively feel shouldn't cost infinite, shouldn't be infinitely suppressed, because you are only changing from A to B in a small region.
This is in X space.
This is in the X space, yes, this is in the X space. Okay, so this is in the X space. So you are only changing phi x equal to A to phi x equal to B inside a small region. Suppose let's take a spherical bubble, okay, and bubble of radius r.
Just one question. What is x again?
X is the coordinates, the usual space coordinates. The usual space coordinates. Okay. So the problem was that we had phi equal to a everywhere in space. Here phi is equal to b everywhere in space. Right? How do you go from here to here? Right? What kind of tunneling do you have to do to go from here to here? And what I argued earlier that the tunneling cannot involve a process in which phi everywhere changes suddenly to phi. The phi equal to a everywhere changes suddenly to phi equal to b. Okay, because that will be infinitely suppressed.
But if it is compact space, then it is possible.
Yeah, if it's compact space, then it is possible, right? But we are assuming that our space is a non-compact or practically. Yes.
So tunneling is really there's a path integral and there are two saddle points, and it's just that the action at one saddle point is higher than the action at the other saddle point.
That's it, yeah.
So when some parameter goes to infinity or zero, like in the semi-classical limit, this is suppressed exponentially.
Exactly.
So that's really what is going on.
Yeah.
So and the tunneling factor is basically is basically just a correction to this thing. So when you say a bubble is forming, what's actually happening in this picture?
So you are not talking about tunneling right now. What I'm saying is that we'll calculate the tunneling probability later. That quantum fluctuation basically spreads out the wave function, right? Okay, so we are thinking in classical terms, just like here we thought in classical terms that we are here, right? And there is certain probability that suddenly we will be appearing here. Okay? And after that you can use the classical evolution, right? And to calculate the probability that even though we are here, we suddenly appear here, we have to use obligatory. Right? So now in the field space, okay, we are trying to understand what is the analog of this configuration over here, right? From which you can classically evolve. Okay? And what I am saying is that analog of this configuration here is not that phi is equal to b everywhere, right? Because that will give infinite suppression, because this integral will have to be done at every space point, right? And you have to take the product. So e to the minus something, product of all space-time points will give you 0. Okay? But what could happen is that analog of this configuration may be something like this. Okay? But phi is b inside, phi is a outside. Okay? So let's see how much energy it costs. Okay? Because what is special about this configuration, right? What is special about this configuration is that classically this particle sitting here has exactly the same energy as the particle sitting here. Right? That's why once it has appeared here, it can now classically roll down. Okay? You could have asked why not appearing here, right? Is that here the energy is not conserved, right? So you cannot think of this as a classical particle. Okay? But once you have gotten a wave function to appear here, okay, from here on you can think of this as a classical particle and start rolling down. Okay? So you have to see the analog of this, and what I am trying to argue here is the analog of this point over here, okay, is a bubble, okay, where inside the bubble you have phi x equal to b, outside the bubble you have phi x equal to a. Okay? So let's calculate the difference between this configuration and the original configuration where phi x equal to a everywhere. And setting that equal to 0, we will get the analog of this configuration. Okay? Because to get the analog of this configuration, we need. So the total energy, total excess energy of the bubble is 4/3 pi r cube Vb minus Va. Because Va was everywhere, now inside we are replacing A by B. Okay. So volume times Vb minus Va. This is of course negative. Okay. So you gain in energy, you reduce energy in this way. However, you have to remember that on this surface phi is changing from B to A. Okay? And because it's a quantum field theory, phi cannot change from B to A without costing some energy. Okay? Because in the Hamiltonian, there is a grad phi square term. Okay, so that will cause some energy. Okay, and that we can think of as a surface tension. Okay, so suppose sigma is the energy per unit area that it will cost to change from B to A. So we add to it 4 pi r square and sigma. Okay, this is the surface tension. So this means that when this is 0, if 4/3 pi r cube times dv minus d plus 4 pi r square times sigma is 0. Then this configuration can be regarded as a classical configuration. This can exist for as long as you want because you are not violating energy. Right? In quantum mechanically, energy violation you can do only for a short period, right? Because of the uncertainty relation. Okay? But once you have conserved energy, okay, then this configuration can stay classically, okay, for sufficiently long time. Okay, because quantum uncertainty principle doesn't prevent this. Okay, you still have a suppression because you have to tunnel, right? The going from phi x equal to a everywhere to this configuration has to go through non-classical paths, right? So there is a tunneling probability which you have to calculate. But once you have gotten here, okay, then quantum mechanics doesn't prevent this from existing for long enough time. And then classically what is going to happen is that this now will start expanding. Okay, because now it can reduce. Whenever something is in a potential, it always tries to reduce its potential energy, gain kinetic energy, right? That's the standard experience, and that's what equations of motion tell us. And field theory is no different. Okay, so what it will do now is that it will try to reduce its potential energy by making more and more making it grow. Okay, so that there is more and more of B vacuum in the interior. Okay, but the total energy of course has to be constant. Right? So you are losing your potential energy, so where is it going? Right? It's getting transferred into the wall of the bubble, okay, into the kinetic energy of the wall of the bubble, right? Because the wall of the bubble is moving. Okay? So basically the bubble starts expanding, okay, and it uses its potential energy that it is gaining or that it's losing, okay, to power the movement of the wall. Okay, the wall starts accelerating. Okay. And the net result of this is that the wall starts accelerating very fast, and soon, okay, as long as these are microscopic objects, okay, the scales are microscopic, soon the velocity of the wall reaches almost the velocity of light. Okay, and then it will basically expand at the velocity of light and eat up everything that is on the way. Right? Anything that existed in the vacuum A, okay, all its quanta, for example, right? A vacuum has certain excitations. None of those excitations agree in the B vacuum, right? If you look at this potentially, here you quantize fields to get some particles of certain mass square, right? Those particles don't even exist here. So everything will be wiped out, okay? All it will remain is some disturbances, that will be the signature of the original fluctuations which are there in the vacuum. Okay? So this is the way the false vacuum decays. Okay? That you have to find the probability of forming a bubble. Okay. Here you need quantum tunneling, okay, a bubble of a classical, which is allowed by classical energy conservation. After that, the bubble simply expands classically, okay, getting powered by the gain in potential energy or the loss in potential energy, okay, because the potential energy inside, potential energy density inside is lower than the one outside.
Will this process complete in the sense that we'll have the field configuration phi equals B everywhere? Because
it will complete in Minkowski space,
okay,
but not in de Sitter space, because in de Sitter space, right, because of the horizon, the wall simply, because the de Sitter space you can think of as an expanding space, right? It's like Robertson-Walker FRW metric, okay, with the scale factor expanding exponentially. Right? So in de Sitter space there is a horizon, right? So light can reach up to the horizon but not beyond. And this bubble wall of course is not moving faster than the speed of light, right? It's moving almost at the speed of light. So it will basically eat up everything within the horizon but not beyond. Okay, unless this kind of tunneling takes place in another region, right, then that will expand and eat up the horizon around that region and so on. Okay, but this is what is used in this multiverse idea, right? We discuss this multiverse that if you have a de Sitter space, right, with a large enough cosmological constant, right, which is expanding very fast exponentially, then all these bubbles will be formed. Okay, so imagine that there are many minima, right? Not just one, but many different minima. Okay, you may get some region may transition into this minimum, some other region may make transition to another minimum, and so on. Okay. So each of these bubbles will start expanding at the speed of light. Okay, having a new phase in the interior. But because it can only go up to the horizon, okay, as long as the de Sitter expansion rate is sufficiently high, it will never catch up, right? So the original vacuum will still remain, okay, and keep creating more and more newer vacuum of this kind of lower energy.
The vacuum are not necessarily discrete points, right? They can be so they can be flat directions as well.
They can be flat directions also. Those are typically Minkowski ones, okay, or some supersymmetric ADS ones, right? Like we saw, for example, that before you introduce superpotential for rho, right? Rho was a flat direction, right? Rho could take any value and you had a supersymmetric minimum. But typically, once you have broken supersymmetry, the vacua are discrete, right? Because any field, any massless field gets a potential at some level or other.
Excuse me, by bubble solution, do you mean the certain limit of ink-like solution along the
Yes, exactly. So it's basically like a one dimension. We'll do it more explicitly when you do the tunneling calculation. It is effectively, right? So this is what is called thin wall approximation. We are assuming here this picture is valid when the size of this bubble is sufficiently large compared to the thickness. Right? See, there is a phi changes from B to A, right? It's not a theta function. You have to see what is the minimum energy configuration of phi to change from A to B. So there is a scale over which phi varies. Okay. And this kind of expression, for example, that I have written here, is valid only if the bubble size, okay, is sufficiently large compared to the thickness. Right? Otherwise, you have to use a more complicated formula. Right? Otherwise, the field varies continuously. Right? It's not that phi x is exactly equal to B here and phi x is equal to A here. Okay. This is at the time of formation of the bubble. Okay. So this is the thin wall approximation.
So realistically, this looks like a tangent hyperbolic.
Yes, this realistically this will look like a tangent hyperbolic depending on the kind of potential. Yes. Yeah. Okay, are there any other questions? Okay, now before I go on, let me just discuss a few more things. Okay. One is that we can ask this question. So whenever there is a scalar field, this kind of possibility exists, right? That we may be living at a minimum which is only local minimum and not a global minimum of the scalar field. Okay. So you can ask the same question about the Higgs, right? Higgs is the only scalar that you know in nature. Okay. Does the potential of the Higgs have another minimum somewhere below? Okay. And point is that we still don't know the answer. Okay. Even if you assume that the standard model is the full theory, right? No gravity, no nothing else. Well, no gravity is a bit of a that. Let's assume that the standard model is the right theory up to Planck scale. Okay, and then you can ask, okay, if you look at the standard model potential as a function of phi, okay, go all the way up to Planck scale. You of course cannot trust things beyond the Planck scale. Does the potential have another minimum, okay, below the vacuum where you are living? Okay. This is still an open question. Okay, and to settle this question, it requires determining the standard model parameters much more accurately than what we have done so far. Okay. And the reason is that the potential that you are looking for, right, is not the tree-level potential, right? What you really should think about is the effective potential, okay, where you include the quantum corrections and so on. Okay. And the quantum corrections typically depend on the coupling, the maximum quantum correction to the standard model potential comes from the top quark loops. Okay. And the coupling of the Higgs to top quark depends on the top quark mass, right? In fact, what is called the pole mass of the top quark. That is still not known accurately enough, okay, so that it could go either way. Okay, that the standard model vacuum, okay, may not be the stable one. Okay, there may be one vacuum below this, even before the Planck scale. But in a sense, one can say that this question perhaps is not too relevant, because very few people believe that the standard model is the final story. Right? That there is nothing between here and the Planck scale. And after all, you know that at least something is there between here and the Planck scale. We have to explain the dark matter, right? Some particle. Right? We have to explain, for example, the mass of the neutrino. So there are things in between here and the Planck scale, and that could change things. Okay? There is some additional contribution to the Higgs potential. Okay? Maybe that's why we have not accounted for somehow. But situation is in fact worse. Okay? But let's suppose that we know the Higgs coupling completely. Okay? We can calculate everything accurately, and we conclude that the Higgs potential does not have another minimum, which is below. Okay? Nevertheless, we can say that there will be another field in the model, okay, at sufficiently high mass scale, right? So that today we have no idea about the existence of such a field, and that field may have a potential like this. As long as this V double prime at A is large enough, okay, larger than what you have seen till today, okay, we will not know the existence of this particle. Nevertheless, that particle can completely destroy the stability of a vacuum. Okay. So this is the reason why this problem, okay, of finding the calculating vacuum stability is what can be called an ultraviolet sensitive problem. That without knowing the ultraviolet theory, right, the full theory, it's very hard to settle whether the vacuum is stable or not. Okay, because you can have a perfectly good theory where the vacuum is completely stable, okay, and you can make a change in that theory just by adding a new scalar field at a very, very high mass scale, which will completely change the picture. Okay. So if you want to calculate from first principle whether the vacuum is stable or not, okay, you really need what is called a top-down approach. Okay, where something will tell you, okay, what the full theory is, and then you can go ahead and try to calculate what the decay probability is. Okay, first you determine whether the vacuum is stable there, and or if it's unstable, you can calculate what the decay probability is. Okay, but you really need to know everything about the theory to have a definite conclusion. Any questions? Okay, so this is as far as I'll say about the generalities. Okay, now we'll go to do some calculations. So we begin by writing down the result in one dimensional quant particle. Okay, go back to particle in one. And here I'll assume that you have seen this. WKB tells you how to calculate the tunneling probability from here to here. Okay. So the tunneling probability, which is called tunneling probability, per unit time, gamma, is some constant, okay, which will not write down, but there is an exponential suppression factor, which is the one that will be relevant for us, and that suppression factor is -2. So let me do some this thing. So we have this is the vacuum A, this is the vacuum B, and this point let's call C. Okay. So this is e to the minus 2 integral A to C square root of 2 P of QA minus so it basically depends on the integral, this integral square root of V of Q. Okay, so you consider in this region V of Q is larger than V of QA. The higher V of Q is, the larger is this integral and lower is the transition probability. This is what the WKB gives us. This factor of 2 is there because you are calculating the probability instead of the amplitude. Okay, amplitude would have just included this part. Okay, you can also think of this as integral P dq. Okay? This will be the, this is the, or the imaginary, this is the, related to the apparent momentum by analytic continuation. Right? E square over 2m, if you think of the energy conservation, then E square over 2m plus V of Q should be equal to V of Q. Right? If you start at this point, right, then momentum conservation will give you this. So P is square root of 2m V of QA minus V of Q. And what you calculate is to the I integral P dq. This I basically converts this V of Qa minus V of Q to V of Q minus V of Qa. And that's what you see in this exponent. Okay, so this is WKB for a one dimensional particle. Now consider WKB for multi-dimensional. So Lagrangian is half Q dot square. So I should have said I just took m equal to 1 on all this. So that's why m doesn't appear. Okay. So half Q dot square minus V of Q. Okay, and we will assume that V of Q has local minimum at QA. Okay. So you think of this, okay, not as a one-dimensional picture, but a multi-dimensional picture. Okay. The potential has complicated shape in these various directions. You have a false vacuum sitting here, a particle sitting here, and you want to see what is its probability of tunneling out. Is this question clear? So the answer to this, okay, in fact, is what you could guess from here. Okay. Because now what happens is that from here to here, there are multiple paths. Right? Because this is, first of all, this surface itself, I mean, instead of being a single point. Okay. Now we have, okay, so let's call sigma. Sigma is the surface, is the subspace Q space on which V of Q is equal to V of Q, but Q not equal to Q. Okay, so sigma then gives many different points in this configuration space which have the same potential as the potential at the minimum. So that's the analog of this point, but now there are many such points, right? Typically this is one equation in say n variables, so there will be n minus 1 dimensional subspace of the Q space where this will be satisfied. And if it has spherical symmetry, imagine the potential is spherical symmetry, right? Then it will be some spherical subspace in the Q space, okay, where this will happen. Typically. Is this clear? So now the analog of this path, okay, over which you integrated, would still start from A. We don't know where it will end, but it has to end somewhere on this sigma Q1 belonging to sigma, and we don't know what path it will take. Along some path Q of S, let me write it here, along some path Q of S with Q of 0 if the path is from S equal to 0. So S is the parameter that parameters in the path. Okay, let me call it tau. I'll be using the tau later, so dq d tau times d tau. Tau. And I can always choose my parameters, so tau equal to 0 is the beginning, okay, that's Qa, and tau equal to 1 is the end, that's Q1. Okay, we don't know what Q1 is, okay. But even if we know Q1, this path is not fixed. Right? In a multi-dimensional space, there are lots of ways that you can go from one point to another point. Is this clear? So this formula as yet doesn't make sense. Right? If you write down an analog of this formula will not make sense because you don't know what this object is. Right? It depends on what path you use or what Q1 you have chosen. Okay. But the answer, you can guess what it is. The answer is that you have to find the minimum path along which this is minimum. Because the particle, if you have kept it somewhere, it will tunnel out to the minimum possible barrier path. Okay. So, to find the analog of this formula, you have to minimize this with respect to the path and then also with respect to Q1.
Can't we say that it will have some possibility associated with one?
Yes, true. But the point is that those possibilities will be related to each other by the suppression factor. Right? This is typically huge. In the semi-classical limit, there is no 1 over h bar sitting here. Okay. So, assuming that this is large, right, the minimum one will always dominate. Right? So, in that sense, the leading contribution will be the one that is saturated by the minimum part. Okay. So, you are supposed to minimize this. And you can do it in two steps. We can first minimize with respect to the path and then we can worry about minimizing with respect to Q1. Okay. So minimization with respect to path you can do first explicitly. And Q1 minimization, that's a minimization with respect to certain finite set of variables, right? That's much easier typically, right? At once you just evaluate it as a function of Q and do a minimization of a function. Okay. But we have to learn how to minimize with respect to the path. Because that's what is more important. There are infinite number of paths that is possible. Is this clear? Now this looks a bit complicated because there are square roots involved, right? There is a square root of v of q minus v of q1, right? And this also in fact is really a square root because it's square root of dq dt dqi dt times dqi dt. Yeah, I'm just written it as a mod dq dt, but it's really a square root of a sum of squares. So we can minimize it, but it looks a little complicated. But of course, we have seen how to get around this problem, right? I mean, when you quantize a particle, right, we know how to deal with square roots, right? In string theory or in particle mechanics, relativistic particle mechanics. So we will follow the same approach. Okay, we will first try to remove the square roots, okay, by introducing some auxiliary fields, and then try to eliminate that auxiliary field by some kind of gauge fixing. Okay, because this action you can always see has reparametrized invariance, right? Because it shouldn't depend on how you change, if you change the parameters of tau, right? Because tau is just a parameter that levels the path.
Does this path correspond to the steepest descent of the path?
Yeah, in a sense it's the skew based descent. Yes, exactly. Yeah, that's the in the skew space it's the path along which you go down max fast. Yeah, fastest. So consider the following action S. So this is a path. So E of S is an auxiliary field that we have introduced. Okay, and now let's consider the case where you extremize with respect to E of S as well as with respect to Q of S. Okay, think of this as an action involving E of S and Q of S and extremize and see what happens. Right? Our goal is to show that this action is equivalent to this action. Okay, so solving that problem is equivalent to solving this problem. So to do that, we basically first extremize with respect to E, calculate the value of E that extremizes it and substitute. Right? And you have to show that after substitution you get back this. Is this okay? So extremize with respect to E of course is very easy because there is no derivative or anything of E. So delta S delta E equal to 0. It gives you half minus half E square, 1 over 2 E square. dqi ds and dqi ds plus dq minus dqa 0. Okay, so this gives you E as 1 over 2 okay, just solve for this. Then substitute back here. Substitute. And we get the action as half. Basically you get not half, the action you get is integral over part. Change from tau to a. Okay, tau is the same as s. So this is straightforward. You just substitute this here and you will get the result. Is this okay? Then each of these terms will give you half of this. So this means that extremizing this is the same as extremizing this, right? So if you can extremize this, you would have solved that problem. Right? And this action at the extremum will give the desired result. Okay? Then the tunneling probability will be e to the minus 2s. Right? That factor of 2 you should still keep in mind. This action, okay, after you have extremized, you evaluate on the path, right? And e to the minus 2s will give the tunneling probability. That's the exponential part. Then there is a prefactor which you are not calculating here. But now of course you can do something else. This one has one dimensional general coordinate invariance. Right? If you think of E as square root of GSS, right, then this is square root of determinant G times the potential, and this is square root of determinant of G times G upper SS, which is GSS inverse. Right? So these are the reparameterization. So using the reparameterization inverse, you can set ES equal to 1. So using reparameterization, so ES is like square root of GSS. Okay, this is more like a clear line for this one dimensional problem. So there is reparameterization. So using fixed reparameterization invariance, so you can set E of s equal to 1, except that you have to remember that by doing this you are losing one equation of motion, the constant equation, the equation that you would have gotten by varying with respect to E. Okay. So the constant which is delta S delta E equal to 0 at E equal to 1, because you are setting E equal to 1 using reparameterization. Okay, so what is that constant? This is the constant, right? You just set E equal to 1. So that gives you half dqi ds dqi ds plus equal to minus Is this clear? Okay, so this problem then basically is equivalent to what we are doing earlier. Okay. Namely, that you work with the action. We work with the action which is given by integral of dq by ds plus dq dx. Okay, you work with this action. Okay, extremize it. Find the path. And you put a constraint that this is equal to 0. Okay. You can easily check that this is a constant. In fact, I'll give the interpretation shortly. You can easily check that when you derive the equation of motion from here, then the s derivative of the constant is automatically satisfied. Okay, so this constant really means that you have to set this constant at one end. Okay, say at s equal to 0, then it will automatically be satisfied as a result of the equation of motion that you derive from here. So this is often called the Euclidean action. So the interpretation, okay, we can give a nice interpretation of this. It's as if it's a particle moving in the potential it's called Q of Q, which is V of QA minus V of Q. Okay, because if you think in if you want to interpret this as a particle moving in a potential, potential is a negative of this, right? The action is T minus V. Okay, so the potential is my V of QA minus V of QS. So what kind of potential is this? So U versus Q. You put the axis here. U versus Q. So V of Q minus V of QA has a minimum at QA, right? Because V of Q has a minimum, right? And V of Q is just of course constant, and the minimum is at 0, right? Because by definition V of Q minus V of QA vanishes at QA. So now this is the opposite. This is the inverse minus of that. So it has a maximum. Okay. It is a maximum, but there is, so this is A, okay, there is another maximum at B. Again I am drawing it in one dimension, but this is, you have to really think of it as a multi-dimensional space. Okay, because Q really is multi-dimensional. So this is what we have called Q1. Because Q1 by definition is where the total energy density is equal to that energy density at this point. The total energy is equal to the energy at this point, total potential energy. So this is in some sense Q1. I am just drawing one particular direction, right? In different directions there will be similar graphs. This is quite clear. So in this notation, what is this object? This object here. This is the kinetic term of the particle. Right? You are thinking of S as a time. This is a kinetic term. And this is the potential energy. Right? Potential energy is V of QA minus V of Q. Right? So this constant basically is a constant that the total energy of the particle is 0. Kinetic energy, potential energy. Right? So constant is that half dq by ds plus u. So it's the motion of a particle of zero energy in this notation. The particle starts at QA, right, and ends at Q1, right? Okay, so you drop the particle from here, let it go here. That's the action you want to calculate, right? That's the classical motion of a particle, and the action of that path, starting from here and ending up here, is what this object is. Okay, and this is what goes in the exponent. In fact, what goes in the exponent is not the action but twice the action, e to the minus 2s. Okay. So that can also be given a nice interpretation. It is the action of the total path where the particle starts from here, goes here, and then comes back. Sits here. At t equal to minus infinity, the particle starts from here, slowly rolls down, reaches it at some point. We can take it to be t equal to 0 or s equal to 0, and then as s goes to infinity, it comes back again here. Is this clear? So this is called the bound solution. Okay, name is obvious. Q to Q1, sorry, QA to Q1, and then back to QA.
Why does it come back?
Because if you have a potential like this, right, the total energy is 0, right, so you start with 0 potential, it loses its kinetic energy, so it has to turn back and come back here. Right? Well, this is the only place where it can sit forever, right? Here, the potential is not flat, right, so the potential will pull it down. Once it loses all its kinetic energy, right, the potential will pull it down and bring it back here.
But our real particle, once it reaches that point, will basically run down to...
Yeah, I agree. So the point is that we are discussing the tunneling, right? In tunneling, what is going to happen is that the particle will go from here to here in the Euclidean time, right? We have achieved our goal here, right? Here, it basically should evolve classically, right? Because at this stage, we have reached the other boundary from where it can evolve classically, right? But what I am saying is that to give an interpretation of what appears in the exponent, right, you can think of these bounds, right? This total action associated with these bounds is what appears in the exponent. Okay? This is just for the purpose of calculating the tunneling probability. Okay? The Euclidean action of the bound solution is the tunneling probability. Is this clear? So if you have found the solution, okay, let's suppose that you have found the solution and we have chosen the origin of the s direction so that it happens at s equal to 0. So it starts at s equal to minus infinity here, goes all the way here to s equal to 0 and then comes back. Right? And suppose you have found the solution q of s. Then from here you can also reconstruct what will happen when the particle has exited the barrier. Because the equation that you have to solve for real evolution of the original particle is essentially the same equation with this term changing sign. Right? The potential became the opposite, right? Just because you are trying to calculate the tunneling probability. Right? But the real motion of the real particle, once it has appeared at q1, will be given by the potential with the original sign, v of q minus v of q. Right? This is just a shift. So how will you get that solution from here? We can get that solution from here simply by analytic continuation, substitute t equal to I. Okay, so if you have, once you have gotten the Euclidean solution, if you substitute t equal to it or s equal to it, that solution describes the motion of the particle in real space, okay, after it exists. That's classical motion of the particle. Is this clear? So the picture is that this bounds allows you to calculate the probability. Okay. It's as if you are propagating in Euclidean time, okay, from Euclidean time minus infinity. Let's say t equal to minus, let's work in terms of t. T equal to minus I infinity to t equal to 0. At t equal to 0, you start propagating in the real time. Okay. The solution remains the same, except that we replace, instead of evaluating in imaginary time, we now evolve in the real time. Okay, and that sort changes the relative sign between these two terms. Okay, this is just an interpretation, right? You don't have to take this interpretation. Okay, but it is useful to keep in mind that this is one way to interpret what you are doing.
Can it be thought of as replacing the Lagrangian with Hamiltonian?
Yeah, you can do that. Except in a more complicated situation, probably things will be different. But yes, I mean, it's roughly like replacing Lagrangian by Hamiltonian.
The Euclidean continuation basically gives you a phase transition, right?
Well, not a phase transition. In what sense is it a phase transition?
When you, in the thermodynamic limit.
See, Euclidean continuation here is just a trick, right? What we said is that WKB, our starting point was WKB, right? What is the tunneling probability, right? And we said that tunneling probability calculation, you can just reinterpret this.
I mean, when you do a Euclidean continuation, you basically interpret this as some as a statistical system, and the Euclidean time basically becomes temperature.
You can do that. That's right. So that's when you calculate trace of between minus beta h,
Yeah.
right? But that's not what you are doing here, right? You are actually constructing classical solution in this background. Right? We are not calculating a trace coming over all states or anything, right? Just classical solution. So here you just think of this as a trick to calculate the WKB tunneling probability. Right? And instead of doing it in terms of the original square root of E minus V, right, you are thinking in terms of this Euclidean action. Right? For particles, it doesn't really matter. You could have done it the original way also, right? Take the square root and extremize it and do this. Okay, it's just a simpler interpretation, and this interpretation we can now lift to quantum field theory. Okay, because after all, quantum field theory is nothing but a collection of particles moving in many dimensions, right? Or many particles moving together. Okay? The way quantum field theory differs from quantum mechanics is that you have infinite number of degrees of freedom. So this general procedure, right, which we have defined here, which is to go to the Euclidean continuation, okay, write down the Euclidean action, then calculate the bound solution, and the action for the bound solution gives you what appears in the exponent. That will still be true in a quantum field theory, right? And that's the way we will try to calculate the transition probability in quantum field theory. Any questions? So let me just briefly indicate what we will do in quantum field theory, and then tomorrow we will do it explicitly. So the action there, the original action is original. Okay, I'm assuming one scalar, but you can also generalize it to multiple scalars. So Euclidean action. Oh, let me say something about the potential. So let's suppose that V of phi has this structure, V of phi versus phi has this multiple union structure. Okay. So Euclidean action, so this whole thing is a potential there. As far as quantum field theory is concerned, I am thinking, or to think in terms of quantum mechanics, okay, it's a collection of particles. This gives a kinetic term, okay, and this whole thing is a potential energy term. Okay. This is gradient energy, but this is equivalent to potential energy. So the Euclidean action is integral half okay, and we can subtract from it V of phi. So this is the equation that you have to solve, right? By following exactly the same, you just think of this quantum field theory as a collection of many particles, right? Many q's. Okay. All you have to do is that you change the sign of the potential. Okay, that's what you do. This potential would have been, or you add the potential to the action. Okay, the action, yeah, you're saying it's more like it is becoming a Hamiltonian. And that's the Euclidean action. Is this point clear? Okay? This whole thing was a potential before, right? Minus V. We now have plus V. Okay, and we shift the origin of V by subtracting V of phi. What is the constraint? Constraint will be that integral dqx is a total energy constant, right? In the Euclidean action. So integral dqx half delta of phi square minus half grad phi square minus v phi plus v phi. Right? Total energy in this Euclidean version is P plus V, this is T, and this whole thing is was minus Q. So we change the sign here. Okay, this quantity dV tau, you can easily check the dV tau of this is 0 as a consequence of the equation of Motion will derived from here.
Similarly, this is the Hamiltonian.
Yeah, this is the Hamiltonian derived from this action. Okay, but the Hamiltonian has all these negative signs, okay, because the potential has changed sign.
So what about that V of phi a term?
Yeah, V of phi a term is here. Oh, this is the analog of that we, if you remember, we replaced the U was minus V of Q plus V of QA. Right? So V of phi a is doing the job of that plus V of QA. Right? See, this is just a constant that we are adding. Right? If you didn't add the constant, then you have to declare that the energy is not 0 but it's integral of V of phi a, right? I mean, this subtraction makes sure that the energy is 0. Is this okay? boundary conditions. So tau goes to plus minus infinity. We want it to be in the false vacuum. Right? If you remember, it starts with a false vacuum, goes up to that end, Q1 end, and then comes back. Right? So as tau goes to plus minus infinity, it should be in the false vacuum. Instead of calling A and B, let's call it phi A and phi B. So that's notation I'm using. Okay? Now there is another condition you can see all easily. From here, so V of phi A minus V of phi, right? This is effective potential energy density. This is this additive term. This has this structure of something like this. Okay. So now you see that if phi, you don't know what it is, right? That's what we are trying to figure out, right? We will get phi by solving the equations of motion. That's subject to all these boundary conditions. But we see from here that if phi asymptotically, take a given tau. Okay, this has to be true for every tau, but any given tau, if you satisfy it, it will continue to be satisfied, right? Take any given tau. If phi doesn't go to phi a asymptotically, okay, as x goes to infinity, this will give a finite integral, right? V of phi minus V of phi a, V of phi a minus V of phi, which is this one. This will give a finite value, right? And that you have to integrate over the whole space-time volume. Is this clear? Because you have the integral d cube x, right? So asymptotically, this doesn't go to 0. Its integral will diverge. Okay? So if you want to avoid that, this is not a boundary condition or imposing, right? We are getting the insight from the structure of the equation and this condition that this is 0. That if you want to avoid an infinite result coming from this integral, you better make sure that phi goes to phi a as x goes to infinity, right? Even for fixed tau. Is this point clear? Right? Otherwise you will get an infinite answer from here, right? So expect at fixed tau phi goes to phi a as mod x. The final observation is that this action is SO4 invariant. Even though tau and x have different roles to play, there is really no difference. If you didn't know what tau is and what x is, right? You could make an SO4 rotation that mixes tau and x. Okay? So the equations of motion are SO4 invariant. So we'll look for a solution assuming that the solution is SO4 invariant. Now, suppose we find a solution, right? What will it tell us? Okay, that's one possible bound solution. Okay, that corresponds to some Q1. Okay, somewhere you will reach at tau equal to 0, right? That's some Q1. Suppose there is another solution. Okay, that will correspond to another Q1, right? Whatever happens at tau equal to 0, that configuration is where you have ended. Okay. Now, if it so happens that another solution has lower action, that will give the dominant decay, right? Because in the exponent, okay, you have e to the minus 2s, right? Whichever is the lowest will dominate. Okay. So we will assume that the spherically symmetric one, the SO4 symmetric solution that we will be looking for, is the dominant one. Okay. If it happens not to be the dominant one, okay, what it will tell us is that the transition rate that will be calculated this way is the, let's say, it will give an upper bound on the or lower bound on the transition rate. Right? Actual transition rate would be larger if the exponent is smaller. Okay, but at least we will be finding a lower bound to the transition rate. Okay, from the false vacuum to the correct vacuum. Okay, so I think in all the examples that are known, I think this gives the lowest configuration. Okay, but there is no general proof. Okay, but we will just proceed by assuming that this is the lowest possible action solution, the spherical symmetric one, and see what you get. Okay, so we'll proceed. Assuming SO4 invariant solution is the lowest action. Okay, so I think I'll stop here. So tomorrow we'll try to work out the bound solution. And then we'll also make connection with what we discussed earlier. Okay. The fact that it will materialize as a bubble, okay, with a specific radius. Okay, we'll see it coming out of the bound solution. Okay, because the solution at tau equal to 0, okay, gives you the configuration at which it will exit classically. Right? Because that's the analog of our Q1, right? Q1 is where you reach at tau equal to 0. Okay, and we will see that that solution in some certain approximation will exactly have the structure of a bubble of the true vacuum inside a false vacuum.
This boundary condition tau going to plus minus infinity, phi goes to phi. So this arises from the observation that action, I mean, we have this e to the power minus 2s.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. I mean, that's why the action for the bound solution is a relevant one, right? Otherwise, you consider half the bounds, right? You start from tau equal to minus infinity and go all the way to tau equal to 0, where the thing turns over.
How would the addition function be SO4 invariant?
Because this action is SO4 invariant, right? We will be deriving the equation of motion from this action. So if the action is SO4 invariant, see the SO4 is the, because this you could have written it as dm del m phi del m phi, okay, where m running from 1 to 4. Right? 1, 2, 3 are the space directions, 4 is the tau direction. Right? So in this sense, this is SO4 invariant action, so the equations of motion is SO4 invariant.
What are the V phi terms?
Oh, they of course don't depend on the vector indices at all, right? So they are scalars. Okay? So the basically the equation will be something like this: del m phi minus d prime phi equal to 0. Right? This is the equation that we find. Yeah, which is manifestly SO4 invariant. Because the SO4 invariance basically means that we can look for a solution which is a function of only rho. Okay, what is rho? Rho is square root of tau square plus x square. Okay, so this will be the Euclidean solution. Now, if you want to know what happens after it exits, right, after you have created that bubble, how does it evolve? You take the same function except that tau you replace by I. Okay, so it will become x square minus I minus t square. Okay, that is another way of seeing. Okay, because it's a function of x square minus t square, the bubble will always expand at the speed of light. Okay, because mod x is equal to t is the place where this function peaks.